The January sun never truly rose over Anchorage that day. A violet twilight hung above the frozen inlet as passengers hurried across the tarmac toward a waiting Glacier Air -8, its props idling against the cold. Frost glittered along the fuselage like crushed diamonds. Captain Laura Bennett, a calm presence in a heavy parka, greeted the boarding line with a nod. "Evening, folks. Quick hop down the coast to Cordova. About 50 minutes." Her first officer, Ryan Hale, leaned out of the cockpit, giving a friendly wave before ducking back to run the last checklists. Inside the cabin, a heater hummed. A few passengers stamped snow from their boots. Mara Lewis, a teacher returning from winter break, slid into row 2 with a paperback. Jonas Reeves, an oil rig mechanic, stowed his duffel and offered Mara an easy grin. At the rear, Sophie Lang settled her sleepy 6-year-old Ethan, wrapping him in a fleece blanket. Flight attendant Tanya Ruiz moved briskly through the aisle, securing baggage and handing out peppermint candies for takeoff. She caught Laura's eye as the pilots emerged for a quick passenger count. "Full house," Tanya said. 26 souls. From the cockpit window, Laura studied the horizon. A ribbon of green aurora shimmered beyond the mountains, while low clouds gathered over the sound. The latest dispatch report showed patchy snow showers near the Chugach Range, but the route was clear, for now. Engines spooled, props blurring silver. As the -8 rolled down the icy runway, conversation hushed. The Aurora cast pale light across the cabin. The aircraft lifted smoothly, banking over a lattice of frozen rivers before vanishing into darkness. At cruise altitude, the cabin relaxed. Tanya served cocoa and crackers while passengers pressed faces to windows, hoping for a glimpse of lights dancing over the sea. Jonas struck up conversation with Mara about the strange half-light of Alaska winters. Up front, Laura and Ryan discussed their approach plan. 2 valleys offered paths through the mountains if weather held. 20 minutes out, Anchorage Center relayed a small craft advisory. Snow squalls building near Prince William Sound, tops around 9,000 feet. "Shouldn't be an issue," Ryan said, scanning radar. "Bands narrow." Laura nodded, but kept an eye on the faint smear growing on the display. Experience told her coastal storms could deepen quickly. She requested a gentle climb to give them margin over the ridges. The -8 droned steadily, its cabin warm and dim. Outside, the northern lights rippled green and violet across a velvet sky. Sophie pointed them out to Ethan, who pressed sticky fingers against the pane. "They look like magic curtains," he whispered. Laura smiled at the sound from behind the cockpit door. She'd flown this route dozens of times. Still, winter nights kept her respectful. A glance at the gauges confirmed all systems normal for the moment. The turboprop skimmed over the Gulf of Alaska, its wings slicing through moonlit haze. Inside, the mood was drowsy. Ethan curled against his mother's side, and Jonas dozed with his cap pulled low. Mara read a chapter by the soft glow of a seat lamp. In the cockpit, the radar picture began to change. A line of snow showers, once faint, was sharpening into ragged blotches of yellow and red. Captain Bennett frowned. That squall line's thickening faster than forecast. Ryan Hale adjusted the tilt control, peering at the screen. "If we keep west for another 10 miles, we might skirt the worst." Laura nodded, running a finger along their route. Beyond the dash, the Aurora flickered through ragged clouds, but below, darkness pooled over the mountains like ink. She keyed the intercom. "Folks, we're seeing some weather ahead. Nothing serious, but I'll ask you to stay seated with belts fastened." Her voice stayed calm, even as she requested a heading adjustment from Anchorage Center. The -8 angled slightly left, threading between squalls. The first flakes spattered against the windscreen, tiny sparks in the landing lights. Wind buffeted the nose. Ice lights revealed a sheen building along the leading edges. Ryan activated de-ice boots, their rhythmic pulses echoing through the fuselage. In the cabin, Tanya Ruiz sensed the shift. She moved down the aisle, checking seat belts, tucking blankets around a nervous passenger. "Just a bit of winter chop," she said, with an easy smile. Minutes later, turbulence deepened. Drinks trembled in cup holders, and an overhead bin rattled. Laura eased power, trying to maintain a steady ride.
Through breaks in the clouds, jagged peaks appeared, ghostly in moonlight, then vanished as heavy snow engulfed them. A radio crackle interrupted the hiss of static. Glacier 209 reports of moderate turbulence and icing over Cordova Bay.
Advise caution. The controller's tone was clipped. Copy center, Laura replied. She exchanged a glance with Ryan. Let's climb to 11,000. Buy some room. The Dash 8 labored upward, engines humming louder as snow thickened around the aircraft. Suddenly, a jolt threw Ryan against his straps. Ethan gave a frightened squeak. The altimeter sagged. A downdraft. Hold it, Laura muttered, pushing the yoke forward slightly to maintain speed. Mountain wave? Looks like it. Ryan scanned the vertical speed tape, which swung between plus and minus 1,000 feet. We've got severe shear off the Chugach. Laura tapped the autopilot disconnect. My airplane. She hand flew, coaxing the Dash 8 through rising and sinking air. Ice sensors chimed. A thin rime crawled across the windshield. Inside the cabin, the storm's voice grew louder, a low roar beyond the walls. Mara tightened her belt, eyes darting to Jonas. Is this normal? He offered a lopsided grin, though worry shadowed his face. Pilots know what they're doing. Up front, Ryan eyed the terrain display. Nearest alternate is back toward Anchorage or ahead to Yakutat, but Yak's reporting ceilings under 1,000 feet. Laura bit her lip. Cordova still open? For now. Wind 22, gusting 30. Lightning from static discharge spidered across the windshield, dazzling white. Tanya clutched the galley counter, steadying herself as the plane jolted again. Ethan whimpered. Sophie whispered comfort. Laura reevaluated. If icing worsened or the waves strengthened, they'd need a quick out. But turning back meant threading the same squalls in reverse. She set power to maximum continuous and watched engine temps climb. Another thud rattled the fuselage. The nose dipped, instruments blurring. Downdraft 2,000 a minute, Ryan shouted. Laura braced. Hang on. She pulled gently. Careful. Not to stall. Snow swirled in the beams, obliterating horizon and peaks alike. For the first time that evening, the captain felt a flicker of unease. The Alaskan night, beautiful minutes ago, had been The Dash 8 bucked violently, its wingtips carving invisible arcs through snow-choked air. Ryan scanned the instruments, voice tight. Altitude's bleeding fast, 9,500. Laura's hands were steady on the yoke, but her jaw clenched. Power set. We need to find clear space below this wave. She flicked the landing lights on. Their beams vanished into a wall of white. Ice accreted along the wipers, crusting over the side windows. A shudder ran through the fuselage. One engine momentarily sagged before recovering with a howl. Warning tones echoed. Stall and terrain alerts overlapping. Terrain, pull up. We can't climb through this. Laura's voice cut through the din. She scanned the radar altimeter. Steep slopes all around. Ryan, search for a valley. Anything. Ryan's fingers danced across the moving map. There's a glacial basin 2 miles south. If we can hold heading. Laura banked gently, fighting gusts that clawed at the tail. The cabin was chaos. Oxygen masks jostling from their housings. Passengers gripping armrests as overhead bins banged open. Tanya shouted for belts to stay fastened, her voice nearly drowned by the roar. Then came the downdraft, a sudden invisible fist. The Dash 8 plunged, snow smearing the windshield. Engine torque maxed out, yet the aircraft continued sinking. Laura leveled the wings. Brace, she called over the PA. Tanya's quick voice followed. Heads down, stay tight. Through the swirling snow, dark shapes lunged. Trees, ridges, the gleam of ice. Laura kept the nose slightly high, coaxing every knot of lift. The left wheel skimmed adrift, jolting the cabin. A heartbeat later, the right wingtip clipped a spruce, snapping in a burst of powder. Impact slammed through the fuselage. Metal shrieked, glass burst, the world flipped end over end. Seats tore free, snow and shards swept inside as the Dash 8 car
twheeled into the basin. When everything stopped, a terrible stillness settled. Faint wind keened across the wreckage. Mara blinked, ears ringing. She was still strapped in, upside down, snow seeping through a gap above or below her. Pain jabbed her ribs, but she could move. She released her belt and dropped softly into a mound of powder. All around came groans, coughing, the hiss of escaping air. Sophie was calling Ethan's name, frantic until a small muffled "Mom" answered from under a seat. Jonas crawled toward them, cutting his hands on splintered plastic. Forward, Laura unbuckled with effort. Her headset hung twisted, one earpiece gone. Ryan slumped against the panel, blood streaking his temple but breathing. She freed him and surveyed the cabin through the broken cockpit door. "Tanya, here!" The flight attendant crouched near row 4, tugging at a jammed belt. "I've got 3 pinned, need leverage." Laura grabbed a bent support and pried while Tanya pulled. Together they freed a dazed passenger, then checked others. Some were motionless. 5, maybe 6, but most stirred, groaning. The fuselage had split behind the wings, leaving a jagged opening to the blizzard. Bitter air swept inside, stinging lungs. Darkness pressed close, punctuated by faint curtains of green light above the basin. Laura forced calm into her voice. "Everyone who can move, stay seated for a moment. We'll get you out." Jonas knelt beside an older man, clutching his shoulder. "We need to clear space, maybe build a windbreak." "Good idea," Laura said. "Grab blankets, seat cushions. Tanya, see if we've got survival packs aft." Outside, snow hissed against wreckage. They worked methodically, pulling injured passengers free, wrapping them in insulation from torn sidewalls, stacking cushions against the wind. Sophie cradled Ethan, whispering lullabies to steady them both right.
And regained full consciousness, wincing. "ELT should have triggered," he rasped. "If the antenna's not buried, they'll get a signal." Laura nodded, though doubt nagged. The crash site sat deep in a V. Night settled heavy over the basin, swallowing the last reflections of the Aurora. The survivors crouched near the fractured fuselage, their small fire glowing faintly against drifts of snow. Wind curled down from the ridges, lifting icy powder into their faces. Laura crouched beside Ryan, who sat propped against a seat frame with a bandage pressed to his temple. "How's the head?" "Buzzing," he admitted, "but I can run numbers. Temps dropping fast. 15 below, maybe worse." "We'll need layers." She raised her voice to the group. "Everyone who can, help gather insulation. Tear fabric from spare seats. Use anything dry." Mara and Jonas worked together, ripping cushions and wrapping them around the injured. Tanya crawled inside the broken galley, salvaging snack boxes and a bag of coffee packets. Sophie tucked Ethan deep into her coat, murmuring that they were camping under the stars. A faint glow pulsed above the ridges, the Aurora again, pale green curtains shimmering between gusts. For a moment, the group fell silent, awed despite everything. But the spell broke when the wind freshened, blowing embers across the snow. Jonas stamped them out quickly. "We'll need a better pit," he said, digging with a broken tray to sink the fire below the wind line. Laura inspected the wreckage for supplies. From the forward hold, she retrieved a survival kit, flares, foil blankets, a tiny hand-crank radio. She passed the blankets around, keeping one for Ryan. "Rescue teams will search along our filed route," she assured them, though her own doubts coiled tight. Heavy snow could muffle any beacon. As hours stretched, they organized tasks. Jonas and 2 others reinforced a wall of luggage and insulation against the gale. Mara coaxed the flame whenever it faltered, feeding it scraps of paper and strips of upholstery. Tanya checked passengers for frostbite, warming hands between and her palms. Conversation flickered like the fire. Quiet confessions, fragments of lives waiting beyond this valley. An older man spoke of a granddaughter he'd promised to visit. Sophie told Ethan stories about summer whales off Cordova, weaving pictures of gentle giants swimming through warmer seas. Even Ryan, shivering despite blankets, joked about how his logbook entry would read, "Unscheduled landing, glacier option." Later, snow thickened, muffling everything. Their improvised shelter rattled as gusts pushed through gaps. Laura and Jonas braved the darkness to check on the 5 still forms laid carefully apart. Confirming again there was nothing more they could do. They returned subdued, faces pale in firelight. Around midnight, the blizzard softened to flakes drifting straight down. Stars pricked the sky beyond tatters of cloud. The northern lights unfurled again. Brighter now, green ripples edged with violet, swaying above jagged peaks. Ethan wriggled free of his blanket, eyes wide. "They're dancing for us," he whispered. Hope seeped back, thin but real. Someone suggested singing to keep warm. Tanya led a halting verse of a familiar tune. Laughter rose when Jonas mangled the chorus. The sound felt fragile, yet it bound them against the dark. Time blurred, a cycle of tending fire, checking wounds, stamping feet. Laura paced the perimeter, scanning for any orange flicker of approaching searchlights. She imagined radios crackling in distant hangars, helicopters prepping as dawn neared. By the first hint of gray on the horizon, exhaustion weighed on every face. But all who had survived the crash were still alive. Laura crouched near the dying fire, rubbing frost from her eyelashes. "Sun's coming," she said quietly, as much to herself as to anyone. Sophie stirred and pointed. Beyond the wreck, light spilled between mountains. Not full sunrise, just a pale arc. Yet its arrival felt monumental, proof the night hadn't swallowed them whole. "Another few hours," Ryan murmured, voice hoarse. "Search crews will see smoke if we keep the fire going, Laura." The basin lay hushed beneath a new layer of snow when pale daylight finally brushed the peaks. The fire had burned down to a glow, its warmth barely felt through the bitter air. Survivors huddled close, steam rising faintly from damp clothing. Laura climbed a rise near the shattered tail, scanning the sky. A weak sun hovered above the ridgeline, casting copper light across jagged cliffs. She cupped gloved hands to her mouth and shouted, testing her voice against the morning silence. Only echoes returned. Back at the wreck, Tanya was helping Sophie adjust Ethan's blanket. "He's still warm," Tanya said with a tired smile. Ethan offered her a sticky candy from his pocket, a small treasure from the galley, and she laughed softly. Ryan sat propped on an overturned seat, calculating on a scrap of safety card. "If our beacon's transmitting, they'll grid the pass first," he murmured to Laura. "We're maybe a mile south of track." Jonas straightened from tending the fire. "Let's get smoke up, make us easy to spot." Together they piled branches, bits of seat foam, and strips of vinyl into the shallow pit Jonas had dug overnight. When Laura struck a match, the flames caught with a hiss, sending a thick column into the cold air. Minutes passed, long, taut. Then a faint thump of rotor blades drifted from beyond the ridge. Heads snapped up. Ethan gasped, pointing skyward. A dark speck appeared, growing larger against the snowfields. A rescue helicopter skimming the valley. Cheers erupted. Jonas waved a bright orange seat cover. Tanya fired one of the kit's flares, its red trail bright against the white. The chopper circled, banking carefully before settling on a narrow shelf of packed snow. A medic leapt out, sprinting across drifts with a pack slung over one shoulder. "Who's in charge?" he called. Laura stepped forward, voice hoarse but steady. "Captain Bennett, 22. Survivors, 6 serious injuries, 5 deceased aft." "Understood." The medic keyed his radio. Soon, more rescuers spilled from the aircraft, fanning through the wreck to assess wounds and prepare stretchers. Relief swept the group, followed swiftly by weariness. Mara wept quietly as a medic wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. Sophie clung to Ethan, whispering thanks over and over. Jonas helped steady Ryan as rescuers eased him onto a sled. One by one, survivors were escorted or carried to the waiting helicopter. Tanya remained near the entrance, checking names off a scrap of paper torn from the safety card. She and Laura exchanged a long look. Gratitude mingled with grief for those they could not bring home. As the last stretcher was loaded, Laura took a final glance at the fractured Dash 8 resting in its snowy cradle. The aircraft that had protected them through impact now stood silent, half buried, its torn metal catching morning light. She laid a gloved hand on its skin, a wordless farewell. The helicopter lifted, sending snow swirling in luminous spirals. From the air, the basin looked impossibly remote, rimmed with jagged rock and shadow. Beyond, the coastline stretched toward the Gulf, sparkling beneath a fragile sun. Weeks later, an NTSB report would explain the sequence. A sudden mountain wave downdraft, heavy icing along the leading edges, and a ridge-hidden valley that left no room for recovery. Investigators commended the crew for controlling the descent enough to reach survivable terrain. Recommendations called for improved forecasting tools and enhanced de-icing equipment for regional fleets flying Alaska's interior. At a memorial held that spring in Cordova, survivors gathered with families of those lost. A simple plaque listed every name, framed by a photograph of the Aurora over snow-clad mountains. Ethan, shy but smiling, traced his finger over the green lights in the photo and said, "That's what we saw." Laura stood with Tanya and Ryan, shoulders touching. They remembered the silence after the crash, the long, cold night, and